So just before Christmas, we got a Game Informer interview with Stig Asmussen, where he covered some of the news about the stances that we've kind of heard a little bit about since some of the early interviews way back when the first teaser trailer dropped. Now, like I said, this was before Christmas. It is now obviously after New Year, so I've been pretty slack on this. It came out like 2 or 3 days before Christmas. I was going to make a video at the time, and then I thought, nah, it's just not worth it. I was taking time off, and I thought I'd just save it for when I essentially can actually be bothered and I'm back in like work mode. So at this point, this is barely even news. I'm probably the worst news presenter in the history of mankind, but I'm getting around to it in the end, boys, so that's all that matters. So without wasting any time, let's jump right into all of the news. So like I said, Stig Asmussen, who is the, I believe, lead design director, I could be wrong on that exactly, but he's essentially like the head of Respawn in terms of the Jedi franchise anyway. He did an interview on Game Informer, which is obviously a very big company, and he kind of touched on a few little mechanics within the game, mostly touching on the stance mechanic that we've kind of heard a little bit about, but we're still not, fully sure of how this stance mechanic is actually going to work. So he went on to say in the interview that we have 5 fully realized stances in the game. A lot of it depends on the enemy that you're coming across. It's advantageous to use certain types of stances against certain types of enemies, and it's up to the player to figure that out. It requires the player to break down the enemies and figure out what the best weapon of choice is. Now, for me personally, I absolutely love that line right there. He says it's up to the player to figure that out. I love entering into a new battle with an enemy that you've not faced before. I remember this happening in Fallen Order when you first come up against the Purge Trooper, and you're kind of just looking at this guy like, what am I meant to do? I don't know how to attack him. I don't know what his attacks are. That for me is something that I love about these types of games. It was the same with Elden Ring. For any of you that played that, I loved coming up against bosses and just not knowing what the hell I'm meant to be doing, and you kind of just have to take a few deaths and figure it out. So I love that he mentioned that there, and it's obviously even more in depth with this stance system where you might try one playstyle against that certain enemy and you might get absolutely murked, and then you go, okay, let me try a different one, and then that one, pans out in the end. So I think this is going to be a really, really good addition to the game, even just going purely off what he just said in that first pretty much paragraph of the interview. Now, he goes on to kind of touch on what those stances are going to be. Like he said in that first paragraph, there are going to be 5 stances in the game, and we've actually seen, or at least we know of, 3 different stances already. So the first stance that we know is the dual blade option, which is where Cal is literally dual wielding. It's not, the double bladed saber like we had in Fallen Order. He actually has both parts of the saber separated, and he's using them both at once, pretty much like Ahsoka, for example. We did see that for a split second in the trailer, both in terms of an attack, and then I think we also see him sprinting at an enemy and blocking those blaster bolts as well. So we have seen that already. One that we haven't seen though is that Cal can actually use his blaster and lightsaber at the same time. We've kind of known that he's going to have a blaster. There were some action figures released a while ago, or I think leaked a while ago anyway, where Cal has a blaster on his hip, and then we also kind of see it, you can't definitely tell, but in the first teaser trailer you can kind of see that he has what looked to be a blaster on his hip. So we kind of knew Cal was going to have a blaster, and then obviously with the pre-order bonuses that was essentially confirmed, because you can have different skins for a blaster, so that essentially just confirms Cal was going to be using the blaster. But we didn't know that you could actually essentially wield them at the same time. So you can probably have your saber in the left hand and then you're holding a blaster in your right hand. That is going to be so much fun. I cannot wait to try that out, and I wonder how, I kind of feel like that's a little bit overpowered, to be honest, but I'm sure they will balance it quite well, and maybe it makes your attacks weaker because you're only just fighting one-handed, even maybe slower or something. So I'm sure they'll balance it out, but that is definitely pretty awesome to hear confirmation that we can use both weapons at the same time. He followed that up by saying it really speaks to where we find Cal in this part of the story. It's 5 years since the first game, and the dark times are still in full swing. He's an unconventional Jedi, and he has to do unconventional things. So something that would be frowned upon during the height of the Jedi Order, Cal's finding he's going to do whatever it takes. So cue the Obi-Wan so uncivilized meme. That is essentially what he's getting at there.
So uncivilized.
Jedi generally did not use blasters. It was seen as essentially, uncivilized or not the Jedi way of doing things, but Cal is obviously fighting for survival. He has to do what he has to do. So I think that's pretty awesome to hear that. Now, the third confirmed stance that we hear, which is another one that we have seen in the trailer, is the crossguard lightsaber. So we see at the end of the trailer that Cal equips that saber and it's got a crossguard on it, and it looks like his attacks are heavier in that clip there. Myself and pretty much every other YouTuber were all speculating that that looked heavier looks like more of a heavy attack, and that has essentially been confirmed by Stig here as well. He said it's a more confident approach, it's weighty, it's beefy, but you have to be very measured on how you use it because the timing windows are longer with the blade. So the great thing about all of these different types of stances is that they're going to really change the way you play. It's not going to be the same as how it was in Fallen Order, where obviously you could have the double-bladed saber or the single saber, but really the attacks were all pretty much the same. They looked, they had their own animations and they were a little bit different swing speeds and different damage and stuff, but it was really the same. It was just slightly different between the two, whereas now it's going to be like actually affecting the timing. And for example, if you're fighting enemies who have very quick attacks and you're using the heavy attack, that probably won't do very well. Whereas in Fallen Order, it was kind of like it didn't actually matter that much which one you used on which enemy. Maybe in boss fights it was a little bit different because the single bladed saber dealt a tiny bit more damage, so in that situation it definitely was a difference. But against like regular stormtroopers, it literally did not matter which one you used, whereas now it feels like it actually is going to make a difference. So that sounds absolutely awesome to me, and like I said, I think it's going to be awesome to be running around the map and you've come across this new enemy and you don't actually know which stance to use. You don't know if that blaster and saber combo is going to work. Maybe the heavy attack is best on them, and you kind of just have to figure that out by pretty much copying the L and just trying something, and if you die then you go, okay, that one didn't work, let me try the other one. And for me, that is a big part of what I find enjoyable about these types of games, is actually like the feeling of progressing and getting better at the game. It makes the storyline feel like earned, if that makes sense. When you finally kill that boss, you didn't kill the boss just because it was easy, you killed the boss because you actually learned their attacks and how to beat them, and it kind of makes it feel as though you actually did beat them, if that makes sense. So I'm a big fan of this and I'm very keen to see it in action. That was pretty much all that was mentioned about these stances in this interview, and we don't know what the other two are going to be. If I had to guess, I would actually say that potentially the double-bladed saber will just be one of the others, because the fact they had that in the first game, it would feel weird to remove that unless there's actually story behind that, because now we know that Cal has two sabers, so maybe he's actually had to modify the sabers and now you can't actually attach them like he used to or something like that. I'm not really too sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if we do see the double-bladed saber again. But then even if that is the case, like I still don't know what the fifth one would be, so I'm pretty excited to find out, and obviously once we do find out, I will be sure to make a video on that right away. But that is going to do it for this one, guys. I'm keen to hear what you guys think of the news that I've just covered, but also if you guys have any ideas of what those other stances could be sure to leave them down in the comment section as well. Thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and may the force be with you always.